is coming.
All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just the ghost of you and me. It's just the smoke and gasoline. It's just the ghost of you and me. Of you and me. All these whispers.
My name is James Hershey. Right back.
All these shadows in my mind. But my reflection I can't find. It's just the ghost of you and me. It's just the smoke and gasoline. It's just the
I don't wanna
ghost
do
of
it.
you and me. Of you and me. Don't let 'em take you away. Don't let 'em bring you down inside. It's just the mirrors in your mind. Don't let 'em bring you down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me, as always, my co-host, Old Boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
Pretty good. How's everybody doing tonight?
Tonight's show is going to be an interesting one for me because it's on Atlantis. This is something that I have been interested in since I was a small child, and I've done tons of research on, so this one should be good. There's some dispute to whether Atlantis is a real place or whether it is just a fictional place that was made up by Plato. The theory for it being fictional basically says that Plato, in his works, he espoused certain themes, and it was like a good versus evil, love and life, all those kind of themes. And the theory goes that Plato invented Atlantis and made it up as a vehicle to progress those themes through the story. And it was simply that and nothing more, that it was only a fictional place that was only in Plato's mind. That's one theory. Then there's all kinds of other theories of what Atlantis might be. It goes from stuff that's truly outrageous, like Atlantis was actually a civilization made up of ancient aliens that ruled the earth, and mankind stood up and overthrew those aliens, and that is the destruction of Atlantis, and that's how we reclaim the planet. There's that kind of theory. I've even heard theories that are coming out now that Atlantis has been found in the Antarctic and the government is covering it up. Now, I don't know how true that one is, but it doesn't sound very likely. Now, if we go by history, there's a lot of different mentions of a place like Atlantis. Ancient Egyptians, they had a lot of stuff about a place that was similar to Atlantis, but they didn't call it by name. Ancient Crete also had legends and stories about a place like Atlantis that was an island that was filled with advanced technology, and it was basically a utopia on Earth. But they also didn't call it by name. The only place that it really appears, and also the earliest place that it appears, is in Plato's writings. And in his writings, he talks about this society that was like a really moral, spiritual people, okay? And they had like a highly advanced utopian type society. And everything was going along great for quite a while. And then they became evil in a way. They became like petty and greedy and filled with lust and sin, and began to make war on the rest of the world. And because they had such advanced technology, they were able to fairly easily conquer most of the known world at the time. According to the stories, the only people that were able to stand against Atlantis was the ancient Athenians. And the Athenians actually defeated them in battle and destroyed them. Now, I don't know which one you believe personally. I don't know if you believe any of those things. There's been a lot of people that have went looking for Atlantis. A lot of different explorers, a lot of different TV shows have been done on Atlantis. I mean, I'm not going to cover all of that information because a lot of it is tedious, but one of the most interesting to me was the theory that they had found the walls of Atlantis off the coast of the Bahamas. And what I'm referring to there is a place called the Bimini Road. And that's off the coast of Bimini, which is an island in the Bahamas. It's 50 some miles away from the United States. And what happened was they found this, divers found this wall. And all you really see of the wall at this point in time is the very top of the wall. And the reason they think it's a wall is because it's miles and miles of rectangles. Just stones that are in the sea floor, in the sand, that are perfect rectangles. I mean, you could literally put a ruler against them. They're straight lines. And every stone is identical, and it just keeps on going. So what they're thinking is that it was the outer wall of the city of Atlantis at one time, because their theory is you don't see straight lines like that very often in nature. Usually, especially when you're talking about water, usually in nature you have lines that are rounded. So by seeing these straight lines that looks like they've been manufactured, they believe that it's a wall. There's really no real concrete proof of whether it was an ancient wall or whether it wasn't an ancient wall. It could just be a natural phenomenon, but like I said, the appearance of the straight lines is what makes scientists think that it's man-made. Even if it is man-made, there's really no way to tell if it was Atlantis or some other ancient civilization. But it's a very, very interesting and intriguing theory and find, because it makes you think. I mean, I love things like this when we discover something that's kind of off and weird like that. And I think we should definitely do as much as we can to try to learn what this place is, or if it is just a natural phenomenon. The problem you run into in trying to discover it mainly is that it's underwater. I mean, you can go there and you can dive down and look at it. I mean, it's not very deep. I'm not sure exactly how deep it is, but I don't believe it's very deep at all. I think it's about, I'm trying to remember, I believe it's about 20 feet under the water. Somewhere around 20 feet, I believe it was. Down in the water is where this wall is that they found. And they call it the Bimini Road because it looks like a road, but they think that it was a wall, is what they're saying. It's about a half-mile long, and it has a pronounced hook at one end of it. And the stones are around 13 feet across, 12 or 13 feet across. And like I said, they're rectangles. And they look like manufactured slabs. They look like somebody, did the stonework on them and made them all uniform. It's really quite an amazing thing. If you get the chance, I'm sure they have something on it on YouTube. I actually saw a special on the Science Channel about it at one point in time. And they actually showed footage of the guys diving down and looking at these structures, this road that they found. It's really quite amazing to look at because it really does look like the top of a wall. You could really imagine these giant stones making up this wall that's been constructed around an ancient city. You know what I mean? But like I said, there's absolutely no real proof of what it is at all. And myself, I tend to doubt very seriously that it is actually Atlantis. I think it might have been something. It might have been some kind of city at one time that ended up underwater. I mean, because there's all kinds of different things that can make it go underwater. What I think, if Atlantis was real, I believe that most likely Atlantis was in the island of Santorini, where there's a gigantic volcanic caldera. Now, the timeline is off. Okay, I'll just say that. The timeline is definitely off. Because when Plato talks about Atlantis, now granted, all we're going by is what Plato is saying. Okay, in his two, he wrote like two dialogues, and in those dialogues is where he talks about Atlantis. It was Critias and Timaeus or Timaeus, something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was called. It was something like that. But those were the two that he wrote in them about. And when he wrote it about 9,600 BC is when he said that Atlantis existed, because he said that the stories were handed down generation after generation after generation, basically. And he said it was around 9,000 years before him. I believe that's what it's. So about 9,600 BC, something like that is what we're looking at, is when Plato says Atlantis was destroyed, when it sank down into the ocean. Now, Santorini, the volcanic eruption that destroyed the majority of that island, happened around 1600 BC. Okay? So you're looking at a very large amount of time difference. I mean, you're 8,000 years, basically, difference. But like I said, with Plato, all you're going by is what he's saying. And he's saying that this stuff was handed down generation after generation. So it's possible that, I mean, you're still looking at about 1,000 years before Plato that this eruption took place. So if that's the case, then it's possible that it was handed down generation after generation and the timeline got exaggerated. So it could be Santorini. Some of the things that make me think that it is Santorini fits the bill. I mean, if you look at the description that Plato offers up of Atlantis, it was a circular ring of islands that had multiple rings, and in the center was where the capital was of Atlantis. Santorini, before the volcanic eruption that destroyed the majority of it, was a circular batch of islands with a large island in the center. So the description fits. He also talks about how Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which most people agree is the Strait of Gibraltar. So Santorini would fit the bill there too. That volcanic eruption that destroyed Santorini and the whole island area there, that fits the bill as far as the destruction of Atlantis was described as well, because he described Atlantis as being destroyed by fire and explosions and all this kind of stuff and sinking into the sea. Well, when the volcano erupted, it formed a caldera that sunk all the islands down into the sea, and there was fire and brimstone and lava and all that kind of stuff flying everywhere. So that definitely fits the bill as well, as far as the destruction of Atlantis, of what it would look like, what it would smell like, what it would feel like to people that were describing it. Now, you can fly over Santorini now, and you can still see the caldera. Okay, you can still see the outline of the circle. So you can see what it would have looked like at that time period. Now, most likely, some of the descriptions of Atlantis, where they talk about a technologically advanced civilization, they talk about a utopia, they talk about later on in Atlantis it becoming a warlike people that were very powerful. All of those things fit that area as well, because Santorini was once part, like I said, of that giant circular island chain, and that was the home of the Minoans, the Minoan civilization. And the Minoan civilization, for those that know the history, was very powerful, very influential, and nobody quite knows what led to their downfall, why they went away. They were strong, they were strong, they were strong. They had the volcanic eruption, and a lot of historians say that that is what caused the Minoan civilization's downfall. That's what caused them to just kind of die off, move away, whatever happened to them. They disappeared from history. So that kind of fits as well, you know, because you had the eruption, and then you had the caldera, and that formed a giant tsunami that took out a lot of the other stuff in the Minoan civilization there. Did just an amazing amount of damage. Now, whether this was Atlantis or whether it wasn't, there's really no way to know. It really, I think, fits the evidence a lot better than any place else that I've heard of. But the problem is we don't even know for sure if Atlantis was real or if it was just fiction. Because when Plato wrote about it, he wasn't writing about a historical thing. You know what I mean? He was writing a fictional story. So for all we know, it could just be what that one theory was, which was just something that was made up in his mind. It was, complete and total fiction. But Plato himself hinted at the fact that Atlantis was used in his story, but it was a real place that had actually existed. Now, whether or not that's true or whether that's just clever marketing and hype in order to, promote the work, I couldn't tell you. I tend to believe that Atlantis was probably a real place. Now, whether it was what everybody says it was, that I doubt. I mean, I've heard some fantastic, amazing stories about Atlantis in my time. I'm into this kind of stuff. I'm into all the mythological places and the lost mysteries and the lost histories, and I'm into conspiracy and all this kind of stuff. So I love these kind of things. And I've heard damn near every tale there is to hear about Atlantis. And there's some really amazing ones. One of the theories about Atlantis is that it is an underwater kingdom and always has been. That it is the home of mermaids and mermen, and that they're a species that lives underwater and can breathe underwater and operates underwater, and that's where the king of the ocean is and all this kind of stuff. So there's that whole kind of out there theory as well about Atlantis, that it didn't actually sink, that it chose to go under the water to get away from the world because the world was corrupt and terrible and they didn't like it. So they have evolved over time to be able to live underwater. That's where the story of Aquaman from the comic books comes from. Is the whole idea of Aquaman was that he was an Atlantean, you know what I mean, that came from Atlantis, and he had powers to control the fish and the animals in the ocean and all that jazz. So there's that theory. There's also a theory that Atlantis is an underwater place, but that it's the home to aliens. That aliens have actually come here and made a base underneath the ocean, and that's Atlantis. And that's why they have the advanced technology and all the amazing war powers and stuff that they have, is because they come from a place far away, and they're so much more advanced than we are. You know what I mean? So there's that theory. There's really a lot of really cool ones. And I think that whenever you have a good mystery, such as Atlantis, such as all these lost civilizations really, you're always going to have aliens creeping into the mythology somehow. You find that in a lot of different things like this, like the lost colony of Roanoke and Jamestown, places like that. They even have theories about that there was actually aliens that abducted the colonists and all this kind of stuff. So you're always going to have aliens popping into these places and into these theories and the mythos of it. I tend to discount the overwhelming majority of that stuff. I'm not saying I do not believe aliens exist. I don't know if aliens exist for sure, but I very seriously doubt aliens were behind Atlantis being destroyed. I think most likely what it was, if Atlantis was real, was that it was a civilization that existed and was destroyed by a natural phenomenon. Like I said before, I tend to believe that it was Santorini. So if that's the case, then we know what happened to Atlantis. There was a volcanic eruption, and it caused a caldera that sunk the majority of the islands, and only a small portion survived, which is now Santorini. The rest of it's gone. Okay, so that means that inner ring that housed the capital, where the majority of the people would have been, the outer rings would have just been harbors and stuff like that. The population would have been in the middle. And that portion sunk. So all those people, if they lived there, would have died. So I tend to think that that's what happened to Atlantis, if it existed. The other possibility is that Atlantis was a semi-fictional place. And what I mean by semi-fictional is that there was never a place called Atlantis that actually existed, but rather it was a place that Plato invented, but based on other civilizations. Okay? So in that case, it could have very well been based on the Minoan civilization, partly, and it could have been based, the military part of it could have been based on the Athenian civilization that took place at that time as well. I mean, so it could have been a mishmash of different real historical civilizations that had existed in the ancient world. And Plato just borrowed a little bit from this one and a little bit from that one and put them all together to form this fictional place that he wanted to create. That's a tool that you see a lot of authors use. You know, modern day authors, people that write novels and they write movies and plays, you see that done a lot, where they want to create a fictional thing or a fictional place, but they need it to be real. You know what I mean? They need it to feel real to the reader or to the person watching the movie or whatever. So they base it on a compilation of a couple different places so that it has that real feeling. So that when you look at the place that they've created, you are reminded subconsciously of several different places that are real. You know what I mean? So it has that feeling of reality to it that helps it be more believable and helps the story move along better. So that's a possibility as well, that in creating this fictional place, he borrowed from several different civilizations that existed in the past that were really successful and that had really flourished and that had all of the qualities that he wanted his civilization to have. One of the most interesting things about Atlantis to me is this whole idea of a highly technologically advanced civilization. And I wonder to myself, what does that mean? It's a simple thing to think, okay, I know what technology is, and I know what highly advanced technology would be, as far as what I know, you know, for this time period. If I think as a man in 2017, if I think what is highly advanced technology, I'm thinking time travel, I'm thinking teleportation, I'm thinking interstellar space travel, I'm thinking the ability to go warp speed, I'm thinking Star Trek kind of stuff. Okay? To me, that's highly advanced technology right now. The ability to heal diseases by injecting the body with nanobots that can hunt down whatever the disease is and kill it in the body and then be flushed out of the system through the normal body waste. Things like that, to me, are advanced technology. And some of those things are actually in the works now. They're being constructed, they're being built, they're being worked on by scientists and by engineers in our society today. They just don't have them perfected yet. But to me, that's highly advanced technology. But what I wonder is, you're talking the time of Plato. Okay, that's a whole different time period. I mean, in the time of Plato, what would be considered highly advanced technology? I mean, you're talking around 400 BC here, or even a little bit earlier, you know? So what would it be to him? To a man of that time period, when they did not have airplanes yet, they did not have telephones yet, they did not have electricity yet. There were so many things that we take for granted as modern humans that they didn't even know existed. There wasn't even a thought in somebody's mind to create it yet, as far as we know. What kind of advanced technology did they have at that point? Was it something that we would look at today and say, oh man, that's easy, that's old stuff, man, anybody could do that, but to them was revolutionary and groundbreaking? Or even more interestingly, was it something completely different? Something that goes down an entire different pathway than what we went down. I mean, say we went to the right, and on this path there was microchips and microprocessors and television and radio and internet and computers and all this stuff that we have now. But if we would have went down their pathway, maybe there's different technology that we couldn't even imagine now that has to do with crystals and universal energies and all kinds of interesting things. Who knows what kind of technology they could have had that might be lost to time. They could have been even greater than the technology we have today as far as power goes and some of the weapons they had at that point in time. Who knows? That to me is a very interesting thing, because we don't really know what these ancient civilizations did. I mean, you have to realize that we're basing the knowledge that we have today and what we know, we're basing all of that on very little actual evidence. Archaeologists will unearth a city and find a couple broken pots and a little bit of stone wall, and then they will try to paint a picture of what that place was and how they lived and what they did with very little information. Now, granted, on some sites there's a lot more than just a couple shards of pottery. You know, you do have some ancient writings that tell a little bit about it. And some sites you have a lot more physical evidence, but still, you don't really get a real picture of what life was really like back then, or the capabilities that they had. I mean, imagine that it is now 3,000 years from now, and civilization as we know it has ceased to exist, and a whole new civilization has taken over the world. I'm not saying alien, I'm saying from here. For whatever reason, we blew ourselves up, or some major plague came and killed everybody but a few. They went on to repopulate the earth. They don't remember what happened today because that information was lost. And over time, a lot of the stories got exaggerated and all screwed up. You know how it goes. So nobody remembers what this time period was like. It's 3,000 years from now. It's multiple generations later. And that you have the archaeologists of that time period digging up areas from this time period, okay, through the layers of dirt. They dig up something here and they try to guess what our world was like. Now, imagine that you have one archaeologist that digs up a site in what is now New York City. And let's say he digs into Times Square. So he finds skyscrapers around it. He finds giant billboards and neon lights and all this amazing stuff. And let's say another archaeologist digs up some village in Africa where they don't have running water. They're living in basically in huts. Look at the difference between those two places. And it's on the same planet at the same time period. But I mean, that is a huge difference. So if an archaeologist from 3,000 years from now is trying to figure out what kind of technology mankind had in the year 2017, it's really going to depend on where they dig and what they're able to find. Because if they dig into any major city, they're going to find skyscrapers, they're going to find subway trains, they're going to find automobiles, they're going to find airports that have airplanes. They're going to find the remnants of all these things. Some of it will survive. And they're going to be able to say, wow, these guys could do a lot of stuff, you know? Or maybe they won't even understand what it is. Maybe they'll look at an airplane and have no bloody idea what it could be. Because maybe they don't have that technology. You know, they started over again. So they might not have even figured out how to fly. They might have went in a completely different path than we took. And their technology might be completely different. And they might have no idea what a plane is or a car is. And they find these things, and then they have an object, and they have to try to figure out what that object is and what it does. Now, It's easy for us to look at a car or a plane and say, well, that's a car or a plane. You drive in it or you fly in it. It's pretty simple. But imagine if you had no idea what it was. If you'd never seen a car before, you wouldn't know what a car was. If you'd never seen a plane before, you wouldn't know what a plane was. You might think these things are just houses, just little shelters to get in out of the rain. You might have no idea that you could actually start it up and drive down the road. Now, if they dug down into a village in Africa or an Aboriginal village in Australia or some other place that is rural and out of the way where they don't have the technology that we have, they're going to have a completely different view of what we were in this time period. Imagine if the only thing the archaeologists find is that village in Africa, or they dig down into the Amazon rainforest, what used to be the rainforest, and all they find is some pygmy village there or something. Imagine what they're going to think of us. They're going to think, wow, in the early 2000s, man, these people, they couldn't do nothing. They were living in huts, and they were still hunting with spears and blow darts and stuff and bows. I mean, they didn't have anything. They weren't very advanced at all. They were basically cavemen at this time period because of where they dug and what they found. Now, like I said, if they dig in a city, they're going to have a completely different view of what we were. And I think that's a lot of what happens in archaeology, because you don't get a complete picture of what the world was like. You get a couple little clues that you have to try to, first of all, figure out what the hell the object is that you're looking at. Because if it's something like a pot, okay, like a piece of pottery, then you have a pretty good idea what pottery is used for. But if it's some strange object that you don't know what it is, then you have to try to guess what it's used for, and it might be something completely different than what it was actually used for. We really don't know. Basically, my point there is, when we talk about Atlantis having highly advanced technology, we really don't know what that means, because we are not 100% sure of anything that happened in that time period as far as really getting a 360 view of it, and be able to say, okay, like today, if there's a war somewhere, we can kind of go there and look at it, and we can say, okay, this is what's going on. This side attacked this side, and these idiots blew this thing up, and then these idiots blew that thing up, and we can kind of get a picture of what's going on, and we can see the surrounding countries and get everybody's story on it and really figure out what's happening with something. We don't have that advantage with the ancient world because they're all dead, and all of their stuff has been buried for thousands of years. So when we dig it up, it all matters where we dig and what we find, and we take that tiny bit of information and we try to form a hypothesis, so to speak, of what life was like at that time period and what technologies they had. A perfect illustration of this is dinosaurs. When you look at dinosaurs, you see this illustrated perfectly. They dig up bones. Most times they don't even have a full skeleton. They have a partial skeleton. And from the partial skeleton of whatever animal it is, they try to determine what that animal was, what it looked like, how it lived, what it ate, whether it was a predator or whether it was a plant eater, whether it was an ocean creature or a land creature. There's all kinds of things that they try to determine about dinosaurs by a few bone fragments or a few bones. With some of the more well-known species of dinosaur, we have several complete skeletons that we can look at, but even then you're just looking at bones. So trying to figure out what these creatures were actually like is a lot more difficult. When I was growing up, dinosaurs were lizards. That's what we were taught. They were reptiles. And they were big green creatures, basically, that had lizard skin, and that's what we were always taught. Now the idea is that a lot of the dinosaurs actually had feathers. So they were more like birds than they were like lizards. That's the new theory. That is supported because we've actually found dinosaurs that were trapped in amber. So we can actually see the feathers on them now. So we know that they had feathers. Now, whether every species of dinosaur had feathers or not, probably not. But who knows? Because like I said, until we have the actual evidence in front of us to look at, it's all guesswork. That's why these things keep changing. You look at the T-Rex. When I was growing up, a T-Rex was the king of all dinosaurs. He was the most ferocious creature to ever walk the earth. Oh, he stood tall and scary and roar, he eats you up. Super predator. That's what we were taught in school. Now we find out, yeah, not so much. He actually couldn't stand up on his hind legs and chase after you like they show in the movies because it would break his spine. So he was always down, bending down, for his head was almost on the ground and his tail was out flat behind his head. So he was in a bent over posture constantly running around. And now we also learn about T-Rex. What they believe now is that he was mostly a scavenger, that he would be a carnivore if the opportunity presented itself, but the majority of the time a T-Rex fed itself by scavenging other dinosaurs' kills, basically. So the reason I bring up dinosaurs in a show about Atlantis, I know that doesn't make a lot of sense to most people, but the reason I bring that up is to illustrate the point that we don't really know what happened back then. So the idea that Atlantis existed or the idea that Atlantis didn't exist, either one could be right. I tend to think that it did, simply because there is mention of a place like Atlantis in a lot of ancient writings, like I said in the beginning of the show. Ancient Egypt had writings about a place that was a circular island with a capital in the middle, and they talk about highly advanced technologies. They talk about a utopian society and very, very intelligent, advanced people that they traded with. They never name them, so you don't know what the name was of the place, but they talk about the place. That's what the outer rings were supposedly of Atlantis, was harbors to where you could come in by ship and you could dock in order to trade your goods in the main city of Atlantis, where the capital, where everybody was in the middle, that you could go in there, and it was supposed to be a massive trade hub where there was just massive amounts of commerce taking place. It was supposed to be the trading capital of the ancient world. Egypt talks about that. Ancient Crete also talks about pretty much the same thing in their old writings. So you have not only Plato, who talks about it, he actually names Atlantis. Not only do you have that, but you do have circumstantial evidence in the historical record to back up the idea that there was a place like Atlantis. Now, whether it was actually called Atlantis or whether it had a different name, who knows? But there was actually a place like Atlantis that existed on Earth. And that very well could have been also where Plato got the idea for Atlantis, is from those ancient Egyptian and ancient Cretan writings. So that's possible, that's what he was referring to, and he just gave it a name because it wasn't named. Very well could be possible. So we have the historical record that points to it could exist. The other reason I believe it might exist is because you have a place in Santorini that matches the record of destruction for Atlantis. Okay, not only does it match the geographical description, but it also matches the destruction of Atlantis that was told by Plato. So if you put all that together, granted it is a very circumstantial case, but I believe that there is a case to be made for the fact that Atlantis actually existed. Whatever it was called. A place like what Plato described most likely actually existed on Earth and was destroyed when the volcano erupted, and that destroyed the Minoan civilization, basically, that destroyed that big ring of islands. To me, that makes sense. Now, whether it is true or not, that's really for you to decide. Now, whether you believe that Atlantis existed or don't believe Atlantis existed is up to you. Whether you believe that it was the Bimini Road is the wall of Atlantis, or whether you believe that Atlantis is underwater and it's occupied by mermaids and mermen or aliens, that's also up to you whether you want to believe that. If you believe that it's in the Antarctic, that's up to you too. Or if you believe, like I do, that it was Santorini, that's also something you can believe. Or you can believe it's complete fiction. It's really your choice. And that's one thing I like about doing this show is I'm able to pass along information to you guys about what I see and what I've read and what I've learned. And it's just fun to speculate about this kind of stuff. And then you get to make up your own mind. Now I'm going to throw over to Old Boy for his opinion on Atlantis. Take it away, brother.
Thank you, brother. And very interesting take on the show about Atlantis. This has always been one of my favorite because I've always been intrigued with this whole story. I think it's real. It wasn't just made up by Pluto. And I think he might have got wind of the story, or somebody. I think he knows more than what he portrayed. I think there's a story about that. He only told half the story, and I think that there's more to it. He just didn't tell everybody because some people say some secrets are better left kept, and that's what I believe. And I think that my opinions on Atlantis is I think they were a very different culture than we are. They were very highly educated and past their time, way past their time on technology, like our technology, and probably even better. And what I believe happened is there's people who think it got destroyed by a volcano or earthquake, or it got attacked, or they just went underground. They learned how to, with their technology, they learned how to go underground, and once in a while they'll come back up. There's proof of it being there. Like some people think it's at the Bermuda Triangle, or some people think it's by the Bahamas. I believe it was probably around that area, probably the Bermuda Triangle. That's why we have so many issues of people like crashes and people disappearing, and because I think there's something there. I don't know. We'll get into that in another story, but I think that has to do with Atlantis. And city of Atlantis is like they're saying it could be 11,000 and a half years old or older, and it probably is. My personal opinion is I think they were very above their time. I think they even had stuff that they, like kind of like flying machines. They say they might have some of the carvings and stuff that's been found. I think they were just, what I think personally happened, maybe they got in a war with somebody. A lot of people say the Sumerians had a lot to do with them. And they, maybe they got in a war with somebody, or maybe they got tired of us and just went underwater. They got so their technology got so great. Or there's another theory that they were aliens that just went back to their planet, or they got friends with the aliens and they went with them to their planet, or whatever. It could be either or. There's a bunch of stories on Atlantis of what happened. I wouldn't even really say the volcano is a bad end either. I could see that happening. If it was inside the water, where they're saying it is. A volcano might have ruptured and destroyed the whole place, and that would make sense why it only took a day to go away and a night. And that could happen. If you guys ever seen a volcano, they destroy everything. Lava. If you ever seen it like pour into an ocean, the ocean's cold and it's just like it's still hot. It doesn't matter. And then it turns into stone because it's so hot. It turns into stone and metal or whatever. Like I was saying, the Atlantis story has always been. It's just been great story. I've always liked it.
There's another theory that I wanted to run by you. I didn't talk about this earlier in the show because I wanted to save it for this point when I could talk to you about it. And here's this theory, and you tell me what you think. There's a theory that Atlantis was populated by giants, by the Nephilim, and that when God sent the flood in the time of Noah, in the Bible it talks about how the flood killed off the majority of the giants. The theory is that Atlantis was a civilization built by and populated by these giants, and the destruction of Atlantis was caused by the great flood of Noah's time, was basically God clearing the deck and wiping out the giants. That's the basic theory. And I wanted to say that to ask you about it because you have a background in this and we've done shows on the Nephilim before. What do you think about that, brother?
That is the first time I've ever heard that theory. I don't know. Because that wouldn't make any sense because you never heard the Nephilim involved with it. That's like the first time I've ever heard that theory. I've never heard anything else of I've heard the Sumerians, I've heard the Greeks, but I've never heard that one. But it's a possibility. I wouldn't say it's impossible. But I don't know. Maybe I think it's more the theory it could be alien too. That's another theory. That they got a lot of their technology from the aliens. It would make sense. Look at the pyramids and stuff in different countries, and they said in Antarctica they have a pyramid. They have it on the moon and Mars. So you never know. It could be all linked into one, and it could be the Nephilim. That's a good theory. I've never heard that one. Honestly, that's a pretty good one. That's really good. I don't know. I'd have to look that one up more, James. I've never heard that one before. We'll have to look that one up.
Yeah, it's a really interesting theory. I was looking at it a little bit today also because I knew the basic theory, but I wanted to get a little bit more background on it because I knew that I wanted to bring it up on the show with you. So I looked up a little bit more of it today, but it's the basic theory, like I said, is that it was a civilization by the giants, and that's why they were so successful and so impossible to defeat. You know what I mean? Is because they were the giants. And just for the audience, sometimes we say giants, sometimes we say Nephilim, which is the English pronunciation of Nephilim. Nephilim is a Hebrew word, and basically all Nephilim means is giant. That's exactly what it means. Is giant in Hebrew is Nephilim. That's why sometimes we use Nephilim, sometimes we use giant, sometimes you'll hear us say Nephilim, which is just the American way to pronounce Nephilim, basically. So just to clear that up for the audience, so you guys knew.
That would be that. Maybe we could look that up for the next show. For a next show down the line, for you guys to see if there's any truth to that. That would be kind of. But let me get back to the Atlantis thing. I think it's more alien. That's my opinion. And I'll be honest. I think we'll eventually find it when we get better technology to go under the water. Because you got to remember, we only got 5% of what's in the ocean anyway, but we don't have enough to go down all the way yet. We can go pretty far, but I figure eventually in the next 50, 60 years, maybe even less, we'll find it. And then it's going to blow everybody's mind. I think it's going to change the way we think about life. I think they know about it too. I think they hide it. And I don't think Atlantis was the only thing they had. I think they had places in South America, Antarctica. I think they had it all over the place. I think they were saying the Atlanteans were the first people to find the United States, actually, before anybody else did. They found it 11, 12, 13,000 years ago. And if that's true, that's crazy to think about that. Our way of thinking has to change then. So everything's going to change. If they ever find Atlantis is real, it's going to be crazy. It's just like the mystery with the dinosaurs, with dinosaurs, what really happened. I think that's the same thing with Atlantis. I think something happened and we'll never really know exactly. We'll find out more and probably find out it existed. But there's probably more to the story than what we think. It could have just sunken in the ground. They could have been on an island. If you have islands, sometimes they sink away. And that could have been what happened, a shift in the earth. The plates shifted and it just went away. One night it was there, one night the next day it was gone. And that's a possibility. We've seen that happen before in our history. Things can change in a drop of a dime. Earthquake can change everything. It could have been a massive 9-point earthquake, and it could have changed everything. You could see what a 7 and 8 do. Imagine if a 10 hit. It split the ground and they fell into the ocean. That's a possibility too. That's what I think could happen. But that's all I got to say about that. Maybe I can get some more down the line. I want to give everybody a shout out. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you, ParaX, all the listeners on ParaX. Thank you, all our listeners, for listening to us. And I love you. And remember, always live your life to the fullest. You may never get another chance to. And I want to thank my beautiful fiance, who I just got engaged to yesterday, last night actually, and tell her I love her. And I love you guys, and thank you for following us. Following us.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. I'd like to have you check out the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/James Hershey Jr. That's where you can find all the episodes of Staring into the Abyss, the old episodes and the new episodes. We also do a bunch of little side videos you can check out. They're really cool. I'd like to invite you to check out my novels. I'm a horror author. That's what I do for a living. I write scary books. I wrote the Legion series. It's I Am Legion, Surrogate of Souls, and The Rise of the Revenant. I also have a novel called Call the Wind Spirits. So I'd like you guys to check those out. And just thanks for listening. This is a lifelong journey for us in the paranormal, everything paranormal, basically. We do cryptozoology, we do ghost stuff, we do demons, we do Atlantis. I mean, Lost Colony of Roanoke. We do all kinds of different stuff. There's not a whole lot of shows out there that can do so many different subject matter, so many different aspects of the paranormal. And I think that's a testament to the fact that we spent pretty much our whole lives doing this. We've been studying this stuff and just have a passion and a love for these subjects. So we have some knowledge, and it's fun to get on here and bloviate and to discuss them and throw out the theories and try to answer some of these questions. And it's, I think, useful to be able to get some of the truth out, some of the real lore and the real legends, because there's so much noise out there now. There's so many people that are putting stuff out that don't know the lore, they don't know the legends, and I think there's value in that. So if you guys enjoy the show, then please go to the YouTube channel and like the videos, subscribe to the channel so that you can catch all of them. We'd really appreciate that. We're going to do another show on the Nephilim here before too long, because there's all these Native American legends of the Nephilim in America, which is fascinating. I'm not going to get into it now because literally it's an hour show at least by itself. So we're going to do that in the future. That's going to be really interesting. Next week, we are going to do Black-Eyed Children, so you don't want to miss that. That's going to be a really interesting show. And probably the week after that, we're going to do Dragons, which is also going to be very, very cool. So we got a couple really cool weeks coming up. So thank you guys for listening. Please tune in again and hear us next week. We're here every Sunday night at midnight on ParaX, and you can catch all the shows on the YouTube channel. So until we speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. We love you. Bye-bye.